You had mentioned in our brief conversation that you work for the Department of Agriculture in Arkansas. Were you born in San Diego?
Yeah, I was born up the coast from San Diego because my father was in the military at that time.
What branch of the military?
He was in the Army at the end of World War II, and I was born right after World War II.
So he served at the end of the war?
Yeah.
Did he serve in Europe?
No, he was only stationed in the States.
I see. Did he continue his military career after the war?
No, no, he didn't want to be in the military in the first place, and
I see.
He got out when he could.
I see. What was his career?
He was in real estate and also insurance.
I see. And were you in that area of up from San Diego through high school, through college? Where did you go to university?
San Diego State University.
I see. Do you still consider San Diego home?
Only because my mother's still alive there. I was just there for her 102nd birthday.
Unbelievable. You know, I think we'll spend the next hour talking about her. But we have to learn a little bit more about your mom. How would she explain long life? What adds up to long? How do we live to increase our chances for long life? What would she say to that?
She's always been very active, both physically and mentally. She still wins bridge competitions, and she walks probably a half a mile a day now. And she walked almost 2 miles with me while I was there recently.
And does she walk without a walking stick?
She has a walker now that
she has
keeps
a walker
her balance. Yeah.
Right. Does she look at you as still a little boy?
Yes, she does. In fact, she said that last night. She said something about me being an old man, but still her baby.
You know, I remember being, younger and having a friend in her 50s, and the way she was talking about her mom made me feel okay, because we don't really ever go beyond being the child of our parents, no matter what our age.
Right.
Do you think that climate or what other factors do you think lend toward long life for her? Being active mentally, physically? Is there a food that particularly made a difference, she feels, in her life, or anything in that regard?
I don't think so. In fact, my wife owned a health food store when we started dating, and we eat very healthily. And sometimes I tell my mother that she needs to not eat that, but she should eat something more healthy. And she said, why? I've lived long enough.
You can't argue with her either.
No.
The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what do you remember your first memory of being drawn to bees? Why bees? What were your initial experiences with bees that really created a deep feeling in you?
The first I really remember about bees, besides stepping on one and getting stung in the bottom of my foot, was when I was quite young. My brother had a best friend, and his father, who was a lawyer, had an observation hive in his den, so you could watch the bees behind glass, but they could fly outside. And I spent a lot of time watching them there when I got to go over to their house. And then later, when I was living in Europe and decided to get a small farm in France, the farm had been abandoned for 50 years and it was all overgrown. And I was wandering around the farm shortly after I bought it and found 22 colonies of bees in old style beehives that had been there abandoned for 50 years. 20 of them were still alive. And that was the beginning of my beekeeping experience. And then I went to school in France to learn more about beekeeping and started my business.
When you When you observed it, you said a friend of your brother's,
Mhm.
and you said you spent a lot of time. I mean, would anyone watching you say, "Oh my goodness, this person is spending a huge amount"? I mean, how much time did you spend, and what did you? How old were you, and what did you gain from just the observation
I was
of that
just,
colony? What
I
did you learn
was
about
just,
bees from that observation?
I was just fascinated. I mean, they live in a very small dwelling that they're very crowded in, and I was just fascinated watching them and looking for the queen, which I could find sometimes. And as far as time was concerned, I didn't get to go over there very often. But when I did, people would say hello to me, and I would almost ignore them and just make a beeline to the observation hive.
What is the bee line taken from bees? Is there do the bees that fly, do they make beelines? Where did the beeline come from?
I think it's sort of a misunderstanding. Bees wander around a little bit when they're looking for flowers, but they go sort of directly to the flowers that other bees have told them about. So that
I see.
I, I've never really thought about it until I just said it.
Um, did um, uh, so let me ask you, you mentioned the queen bee. I feel like I'm not being heard at the moment. That I may be frozen.
No, you're not.
Um, oh, okay. So you said during that period you were able to see the queen bee. What's a distinct feature of the queen bee versus the other bees?
Um, she's longer. Her abdomen is a little bit lighter color often, or darker depending on the subspecies of the bees. She moves a little bit differently. I actually, when I'm looking for a queen, I'm actually looking at movement. I don't focus on individual bees as much as looking for the movement of the queen. But she's maybe 30% bigger than a worker bee, but long and sort of.
Is a queen bee born a queen?
She's born a queen, but when the egg is a female bee, all the workers are females. It's just that their diet is made from royal jelly, what's called royal jelly, jelly royale. That is a glandular secretion of worker bees at a certain age. And when the larva is being fed, the ones that they want to make into queens are only fed royal jelly, whereas the other ones on the 5th day after the egg is laid are fed nectar and pollen. And that stops the development of the reproductive system. So they're basically incomplete females, whereas the queen bee is a complete female.
Is there, does that show a sacrifice for continuity? What is law? So they lose their complete female quality for the sake of the queen.
Yeah, and that's an unusual thing, and people don't think about that very often. But in our society, women have an urge, a biological urge to become mothers. But in their society, all the girl bees, all the female bees take care of their mother's children. So they have given up something. They've in our way of thinking, they've sacrificed something. In their way of thinking, they might think we're crazy.
Well, it does remind that how we're supposed to learn human life lessons from the natural world.
Right.
And that we need to find our completeness by taking care of children, not our own.
Right. Yeah. And that happens
And
more
so
in some societies than others. I imagine still in Morocco, you see children taking care of smaller children, and you see, children can run around and a neighbor will be watching them instead of the mother. Here, that's not the case anymore. You know, it's the mother that takes care of the kids.
Yeah. Is there, you know, in our world, it's always a struggle to get to the top, and to be the queen, to be the king.
Yeah.
Is it a struggle for the queen bee to be able to get the royal gel, to be the one? Does the queen have competition before she becomes queen?
She can have competition if the colony is making either swarm cells or replacement cells of queens. The first one that hatches out will normally kill the other ones before they hatch. And if two of them hatch at the same time, they'll often fight, and one will either kill the other, or the weaker one will decide this isn't worth it and I'm going to run. And so they create what's called a secondary swarm. But the queen is,
when you went,
yeah, the queen, you know, it sounds like a person at high level, like an official or something, but the queen's really a sort of a puppet of the colony. She's just an egg factory. And, you know, a good queen will lay up to 2,000 eggs a day, which is more than she actually weighs. And so it's not really a glorious job.
no, if a queen can, so can queens be born while there's a young active queen?
Yeah, they can. They'll do what's called supersedure. If an active queen isn't doing a good job, which is indicated by the lack of pheromones that she's putting out, or the lack of eggs, or the fact that she doesn't have enough semen to make female eggs, because the males are haploids. They don't have fertilization. They don't have fathers. The drones don't have fathers. But a queen that's failing will start laying more and more drones because she'll run out of semen. And yeah, it's a job, and they can be replaced. And so they're replaced with supersedure cells, or they're replaced with swarm cells, in which case the old queen has to leave the colony with some of the bees to start another family someplace else.
And is the old queen ever, you know, is it ever more brutal than that, than simply having to leave?
Sometimes they get killed, but it's rare that the colony will kill a queen. But they do get injured sometimes, you know. They mate on the fly, and so sometimes birds will eat queens because they can't fly fast enough. And so some percentage of the queens don't even make it back to their colony. So the colony needs to try again.
So when you said that the old queen that's replaced needs to fly off and create a new colony, and that some bees will follow her, how is it decided what bees will follow her?
The division of the colony is usually somewhere between 40 and 60%. And I don't know how they decide. Now, where they go, I do know how they decide. They're scout bees that go out and look for a good place to go. They come back and they do dances, and you can actually see in a colony, you can see the scout bees doing dances of different directions. And they try to convince the other bees by their excitement which one has found the best place. And so it's almost like a debate in legislature. And when
have you seen this debate? Are these debates on YouTube?
Actually, I have a video of some of these debates, and when one of the debaters starts winning, it will send other bees over to break up the dance of the other debaters. So it's like our legislature, you know, they argue a lot and they come up with a consensus eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's being struck upon every listener like myself who's completely new to the matter of bees, how completely complex and deep and almost human
Yeah.
in their way of complexity. Is um, is there what to you is most um, uh, inexplicable in terms of depth and intelligence of bees? What do you just can't believe? What to you is most remarkable?
I think probably the most remarkable thing is their pheromones. They have a lot of different pheromones. Pheromones are like, we have hormones that our body is told what to do, but pheromones are odors that are put out that tell other bodies what to do. So the bees are able to produce different pheromones. Even the larvae produce pheromones to say, I need to be fed. It's like a baby crying. They put out pheromones and say, feed me. And the queen puts out several different pheromones, including on the bottoms of her feet. She has pheromones so that the bees can see in what order they need to feed the eggs that she's just laid. Each queen has about 20 or 21 different chemicals that they mix in different recipes to identify the colony as being hers. So all the bees end up smelling a little bit like the queen. Now we can only smell, if we try really hard, one or two pheromones, but there's hundreds of different pheromones that they use for communication. And
That's a whole language.
It's a language. I explain this sometimes when classes and say, say we're in the class and somebody went outside and came back with an interesting type of food, and they can't talk and they can't write, but people in the class want to know where they got it and what it is. Well, they do it with smell and with dance. So it's sort of a sign language to tell the distance that they went and the direction, and also what they're going to be looking for.
There's so many questions that come to mind about the pheromones, but I do want to backtrack a little regarding your visit to Europe, where 20 of the 22 colonies were alive. How much time did you spend at that 50-year vacated farm, learning, working with the bees during that period?
I was learning at that time. And so I went to a college in the south of France for a while to learn about bees. But when I was working with the bees there, I ended up having those colonies that I pretty much left alone. I tried to catch swarms from them. And then I had colonies in modern hives that had frames and everything that I could work with. And I went through those colonies every 9 days, every single frame. And I had been a stockbroker before that. So I learned how to make charts and graphs and things like that. And I did that with my bees. I charted everything out to learn with them. I was in the bees more than it was good for them, but it was good for my learning experience. And so
what happens?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was in the bees probably 4 hours a day, every day.
When you say probably more than what's good for them, what happens if they are, analyzed 4 hours a day? How does that affect their lives?
Well, for one thing, the bees that I had in France were relatively, I like to say, overly defensive instead of aggressive. They were quite defensive. Beekeepers use smoke to cover up the alarm pheromone. Different books say that the smoke does different things, that it makes them think there's a fire, and so they collect their resources to be able to run. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think that bees will put out an alarm pheromone when there's a danger, like a beekeeper coming into their hive. And so we use smoke to cover up that alarm pheromone. Well, it's covering up other pheromones too. So it messes up their communication and they become more disorganized. And so that's why it's not good for them to be in there all the time. And I knew that, but
I see.
I was wanting to learn.
It sounds like it's interesting that you talked about the crossover of a stockbroker and what that person has to do in terms of analysis, and how that you were able to bring that particular skill set to basically the natural sciences, and have that kind of repetition and organizing of information and analysis. Did you ever see yourself as a natural scientist as a young person? Was it?
I didn't like
Do you consider
biology.
yourself a natural scientist?
Yeah, I do now. But I was never interested in science in school except oceanography, because I lived on the ocean. But no, I was, my first major was in marketing. My second major was in finance, and my passion has been beekeeping. So
so let's what accounts for 20 of the 22 hives living 50 years without, and what's supposed to happen to honey? Aside from us extracting it and putting a hefty price tag on it and all of that, what would bees like to see happen to honey?
well, it's sort of like cows. Cows make milk for their babies. Bees make honey to feed their babies, but also to get them through the periods of time when there aren't flowers around. And so the beekeeper's trick is to figure out how to encourage them to make more honey than they need and harvest the surplus honey. The bees are just trying to make sure that they have enough honey, just like the cow's trying to make enough milk for its babies. And the dairyman is trying to encourage the cows to make a lot more milk than the cows need.
So it's basically sort of like a sustainable harvesting, ideally.
Yeah, ideally. But there are beekeepers that take too much, and it's hard to know how much honey to take because we don't know what the winter is going to be like and how long it's going to be, especially with climate change. Everything's changing. The floral sources are changing, and the seasons. I mean, this year we had a record low where I live now that was, maybe almost 20 degrees lower than normal.
Yeah. So, and you can't know that. So how do you exactly know how much honey to take? Let me ask, do you eat honey?
Do I eat honey? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a particular brand that you eat?
My own brand wise, yeah, different floral sources. Yeah, different people have different tastes, and so I don't like to say this honey is better than that honey.
Right.
In some cultures, people like dark,
right,
strong flavored honey. In some cultures, they like very light, mild honey.
Well, you not knowing, so how much you didn't know that you were going to have 20 degrees, colder this year, and you're, in addition to being an expert, you're also a keeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you decide how much money to take the last harvest? And did your bees do okay with 20 degrees less in temperature?
My bees did fine. About 3 years ago, I sold my commercial business, and now I just have a few hives in my backyard. And those hives I got from swarms that I caught around town. So I basically started over with just a few hives. And the first year I didn't take any honey. And the second year I didn't take any honey either. So they had maybe 20 kilos of honey, more than they needed. And I didn't lose any bees.
So you can store honey year after year. It keeps.
Yeah, it keeps in the hive, it will keep. And even, they found honey in the Egyptian tombs that wasn't very good in taste, but it was still healthy honey.
That's like the miraculous kind of level.
Yeah, it is.
So, how many years did you have that business?
Well, I started in France and then closed it down. That was 5 years in France, and then I guess 12, 40, 42 years in Arkansas.
Incredible. What was the name of your business? Did it have the same name in France and in the U.S.?
No, it had the same logo, but a different name. In fact, in France, it didn't really have a name, but it just had a logo.
What was your what was your U.S. name?
Big Creek Honey Farm, because I started it on.
What's the logo?
It's sort of a modern image of bee comb and a flower sitting on the bee comb, and it's sort of bright colors, yellow and magenta. Sort of.
At its peak, at the business's peak, is there any way to convey, I guess how many liters of honey was being produced for the market?
Probably my best year, I sold about 12 tons of honey.
Oh my God.
and then I stopped selling so much honey because it was a lot of work, and I switched my business into selling bees and queens. I was producing queens for other beekeepers.
How many people worked for you in order to sell 12 tons of honey?
At that time, I just had some helpers during the extraction and harvesting period. And then later I started doing an apprentice program where people came to me to learn. And I said, yeah, you can learn, but you have to work. And so people came and worked with me, and I gave them a stipend.
So you've always been, the teacher side of you seems to have always been there.
Yeah, when I was working for the state, I taught for, I think, 18 years all around the state.
Yeah. How does one produce queens? It's almost like creating miracles. I don't know, but how do you do that?
It's sort of a complicated program, and I'm teaching that right now. I created a cooperative of beekeepers that wanted to learn how to raise queens, and I use their resources, their bees, as a basis, and we're selecting genetic traits that we want from the bees. And I did that also with Mustafa and the people in Morocco remotely. I taught them a little bit about how to select a specific trait, and then use the queen that produces the bees that have that trait the most to use her eggs, and then graft her eggs into special cells. And then it's a complicated process, but
it sounds it. Have you been, do you know how many times you've been stung by a bee? Have you been stung by a bee countless times? Do the sting of bees scare you?
No. Here, when I'm in sub-Sahara Africa, I always wear a bee suit. Here, I rarely even put a veil on, and I don't wear gloves. And so, countless times would be the right answer. Some days I've had as many as 300 stings. Most days I have a couple. Yesterday I had one right here, and it's still a little swollen.
Well, is it true that bees die once they sting a person or sting something?
Yeah, bees have a little barb in their stinger. So when they put it in, they can't pull it back out. So when they try to get away after they've stung you, it actually pulls part of their intestines out with the stinger.
Oh my! Do they know they're going to die if they sting?
I don't know what they know.
Did you ever feel you could communicate with bees?
Sort of, in a way, sometimes when I'm working, when I'm by myself, I'll talk to them or I'll hum or something, and it seems to keep them gentle. Some beekeepers say the bees know them, but I don't believe that because bees only live 42 days. So, if they haven't been in the hive for a week, not very many bees are going to know them.
Are bees categorized as insects?
Yes. Yes.
What's the distinctive feature of an insect? What makes an insect such?
Probably mostly the way their body is configured. It's three sections: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, but also the fact that they have 6 legs. Most insects are solitary. Even most bees are solitary. Honeybees are social, and they sort of epitomize the bees, but there are 20,000 different species of bees in the world, and most of them are solitary, whereas honeybees are very social, and live in communities and can't survive without the community.
When you see in the grocery store, a row full of all different kinds of honey, what does it make you feel?
That most of that honey has probably been adulterated or at least heated and filtered to an extent that it's not honey anymore.
And so would you have more confidence in, like, I don't know, just to say, I'm not promoting Whole Foods, but, like an organic food store honey, would you have more confidence in those honeys?
Generally, yes. There's a health food store here in town that used to buy honey from a beekeeper that I wouldn't have eaten as honey. but the health food store was sold a bill of goods, basically. So I would rather know the beekeeper when I buy honey. But
I see.
But I would say, and again, I'm not promoting Whole Foods either, but I would say generally Whole Foods would be better to buy honey at than Walmart, for example.
Right. Does your mom eat honey?
She does, but she doesn't really like it that much.
I see. Does she eat meat? Does
Yes.
she prefer fish or meat, or what is her preference in terms of a protein?
She eats most anything, most meats and stuff. I've been vegetarian since I lived in Morocco. Actually, the last meat I ate was camel.
In 1970, 71.
Yeah.
What inspired you to be vegetarian?
I had been thinking about it before that, actually, and just a combination of things. Some of it's social, economic, in the fact that it takes a lot of hectares to grow meat compared to what it takes to grow, other proteins.
Yeah. So was it the Department of Agriculture that brought you to Arkansas?
No. When I left France, I didn't want to go back to San Diego. San Diego was the fastest growing city for 10 years consecutively, and it was growing crazily. And so I wanted to go someplace that was relatively not progressive in the development way of thinking. So I thought I would go either to the Ozark Mountains, which is here in Arkansas, or the Appalachians, which is along close to the East Coast. And I ended up in Arkansas. And shortly after I got here, I joined some bee associations, and I ended up being the speaker everywhere I went. And so
about bees.
Yeah, about bees. And the state contacted me and asked me if I would go to work for them.
And how many years did you work for the state?
25.
Are you retired from the state?
Yeah.
So did you sell your business and retire from the state around the same time?
No, I reduced my business when I went to work for the state, but I maintained it. And then after I retired from the state, I kept my business for another several years.
I see. Um, you're a teacher, you're an entrepreneur, you've worked for the state on the natural science side. In what area do you feel you've had the most success, or in a way that, in a sense that brought you the most satisfaction? Are you, has teaching meant, can you distinguish, separate these tracks in your life? And which one, if you can grab only one, which would you grab?
The education part.
And why so?
Because I enjoy getting people excited about bees. And, yesterday I put those bees on the roof of the library, and they've asked me to teach some classes there now. And there were people that were excited and were bumping into each other to sign up for the classes.
What is it about? First of all, but let me, I guess this other question connects. Now, we all are aware of, concerned about the drop in the bee population. First of all, is that still happening? And how do you explain it?
Yes, it's still happening. It started in 2006, this cycle of the drop in the population, which happened to coincide with the development of a new type of insecticide that is systemic. It goes through plants, goes through animals, goes through everything. And yet that's not the only thing that caused this new phenomena that's been called colony collapse disorder. It's a combination of a whole bunch of things. It's sort of like a perfect storm with global climate change and with herbicides and with monoculture agriculture, which causes bees to have poor nutrition. You could eat a good food, a food that's good for you, but if that's the only food that you ate, you'd be missing something. And on monoculture like we have here, where there's thousands of hectares of one plant, there's food for the bees for a little while, but it's only one thing, and then they're not getting around diet. And then when that flower is gone, there's nothing. It's a desert as far as the bees are concerned. And so, and then on top of that, we got some parasites that came into the United States in the 80s. I got them in France before that, because they were coming from the east, working their way west. And those parasites, one of those parasites is bringing or waking up. We're not sure whether it's bringing or waking up new viruses. So the bees are getting a lot of viruses that have become very problematic. So a combination of herbicides, pesticides in general, climate change, monoculture, which is nutrition, and then different diseases and parasites. The bees have been suffering.
I haven't thought about this, but I'm speaking to someone who's dedicated a professional life to bees and their health and well-being, and transferring that on to future generations. And we're seeing this systemic collapse. I imagine that describe your feeling as as Ed Levi. I mean, seeing the destruction of something that you so much love. I mean, what is the emotional process you go through as you see this devastation?
I see it on a lot of different fronts. I see the honeybee as sort of being the canary in the coal mine. That the bees started telling us before we started losing a lot of other insects that things are collapsing ecologically. And when we lose insects, we lose birds. And when we lose birds, that causes something else. Maybe the spiders will get out of control. I don't know. It's just, the ecology is just tumbling in so many different ways. I'm watching some trees next door to me that some people with herbicides went through to kill the weeds around them, and they damaged the trees. And just seeing progress hurting things so much. And that's happening in bees too. And, hopefully we can save the bees because they produce a large percentage of our food. Without them, we would have a much less interesting diet.
My brother, because of the colony collapse, stopped eating honey.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that measure that the consumers may take?
People that are stopping eating honey are going to hurt the beekeepers, that hopefully some of them are knowing what to do to help save the bees. Now, beekeepers can be part of the problem, but they can also be part of the solution. People stop eating honey because of the colony collapse disorder only makes sense to me in one way, in that, I don't really like to say this, but some beekeepers are using chemicals in their hives to fight, for example, the parasites. And so I've known people that have stopped eating honey because they were afraid of the chemicals.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
I haven't used chemicals in my hives for over 20 years, but that's because I'm doing this genetic testing and increasing the ability of my bees to be able to defend themselves instead of having to rely on different chemicals to defend them.
How many people in the Department of Agriculture for a state are like you? Just in total mastery of a subject, that gives from the heart, that cares of teaching, that understands the entrepreneurial side, that has level of sophistication where you can grow queen bees. I mean, how many people in a state have reached your level of expertise?
My level of expertise or weirdness?
Because I'm feeling like, how does the world maximize the exposure of Ed Levi? Because that's where I'm at right now. So I'm wondering, how many in the world are there like you? Because I'm worried that there are not many. Please tell me that I'm wrong.
Well, I like to think that you're wrong. I think every country has some researchers that really do understand. In the US, there's entomology departments that almost all of them have some good researchers. And then as far as the Department of Agriculture, on the state level, I'd say very few. On the national level, there's an agricultural research service that has promoted, to some extent, some very good researchers and some really people that I've learned most of what I've learned from. I've learned from the bees, and I've learned from beekeepers, and I've learned from the researchers. And I don't really consider myself a researcher. I consider myself a megaphone for researchers.
Two questions just come to mind. The first are the colony collapses still on the downswing? Has it slowed in its rate? Is it on the upswing in terms of getting better? Where are we in its process?
It's been sort of like COVID, up and down, but generally it's pretty steady at losing 30 to 35% of the bees every year. But then the beekeepers are reproducing more colonies to try to fill in that gap, because you can't lose 30% 3 years in a row without being out of business. So, we've lost more bees than we've regained, but we're still maintaining fairly well. But we're still losing 30% every year.
I see. And I think we're going to have to wind down, Ed, but I do want to ask you, you said you learned from bees. Is there one or two things you learned from bees that you wish all humanity would learn?
Yeah, I would like the politicians to learn from the bees, just how to get along and how to come to consensus and how to make decisions. And as far as my life is concerned, I think it's made me more peaceful and more in tune with the ecology and and understanding the way things should be.
Yeah. You know, I'm so glad to have met you, and I wish I would have met you sooner. And I can't allow this to be the only time I meet with you.
Yeah,
And so,
I need to come back to Morocco.
yeah, and so I just I'm so touched by this conversation. I want to thank Rashid Montasir, our colleague, for setting this up. I want to thank Sana and Kautar and everyone at HAF for arranging this. Ed, is there a worry that in order to counter the drop in colonies, that expanding the colonies may create its own issues and problems?
Sure. Yeah, when beekeepers are making up that loss by multiplying their colony, they're creating weaker colonies. And so then the bees become more susceptible to the same problems.
Their immunity isn't as strong?
Yeah, they're not, unless they're selecting for traits that will help them fight problems, they're just going to multiply the problems, because a weak colony is not the same as a strong colony, just like a weak body isn't going to survive as well as a strong one.
Yeah. I must ask this too. You had mentioned that of all the different bee species, there are some more aggressive and some more passive. What accounts for that? And on the aggressive end, why are they aggressive? What's making them so? I assume something related to survival, but what's prompting the aggression?
The more overly defensive, I like to say, bees are coming from Africa, and they're coming from sub-Sahara Africa. And we got some of those, they got imported into Brazil. I believe that they became more defensive because of the predators that were around. And so over the centuries, they just learned to defend themselves against more predators. And the predators include the honey hunters and, the people that were harassing the bees in order to get some honey from them.
I see.
But also the wildlife and the bees from sub-Sahara Africa are quite defensive. And then when they mixed with the bees from the Americas, they got even more aggressive.
I see. Is there a bee species among the 20,000 that when they sting, they don't lose part of their intestine, that they actually live after a sting?
It's only the honeybees that do that. The other bees and wasps and hornets and all those, they don't have a barb on their stinger. But the honeybees do.
I see.
The honeybees get blamed for a lot of stings that might not have been a honeybee.
Yeah. Is it possible to love an insect?
Beekeepers brag about how pretty their queens are. So I guess in a sense.
I ask because, I'm about to go into the other room and tell my kids we have to be protectors of bees, and there's no, they see a bee and they run the other direction. We just have to be more. How would you like people to treat bees, the random bee that we see?
To appreciate it for the work it's doing, because it's just trying to collect honey and pollen, but when it's doing that, it's making food for us by pollinating.
Yeah, I'll be sure to convey that. Ed Levi, thank you for sharing. I want to say that I wish everyone a long, happy life, just like Ed's mom, and thank you all for listening. Ed, we'll be in touch. It's learning about bees is a major priority of Moroccan farming communities. So I hope our relationship continues ever more.
I do
And
too.
from Marrakesh and from Arkansas, we wish everyone very well. Take care, Ed, and I thank you with all my heart again. Thank you. Be
Okay.
well.
Shukran. Bye.
Shukran.